Welcome to Carrickfergus Vineyard, a place of hope where lives are changing. We're a church in the heart of Carrickfergus, passionate about seeing people's lives changed by the love of Jesus. The following message was given at one of our Sunday services.
Well, folks, if you're our guest here this morning, you join us in a really interesting time in the life of our church. We are looking at Mark's Gospel. Many of you have brought your Mark's Gospel with you and a pen, and that's fantastic. If you don't, that's okay. Use your own Bible, or please do open up on your smartphones the YouVersion of the Bible if you wish to. Many of the verses that we're going to be referring to will be projected there, but it's really, really good for those of us who have been kind of following and journeying along. And it is a journey. It has been a journey. And again, if you've missed lots of the content, we're on this journey. We've been on this journey. And Mark chapter 8, it's kind of half-time. It's like, you remember, certainly when I used to play football, it's the half-time oranges. You go back in the change room, you talk about the first half, and then you kind of look forwards to the second half. And that's really the pivotal time that we're in within the gospel. And there is a pivotal moment in the gospel. And as we go through this together, I really want you to pay attention to it and see, hopefully we can see it. But as we do that, let's remind ourselves right at the very, very beginning. The first verse of chapter 1, Mark, who's the writer of this gospel, says this. He says, the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. He, the writer, is making a deliberate point to the readers of this gospel when it was written, and to us today. He is showing us, he is pointing us towards convincing us that Jesus is who he said he was, that he is the Messiah. And it forces the reader and it forces us to kind of look at that, to listen to that, and to see with our eyes for ourselves, and then to respond to that very thing. And Mark is just unashamedly trying to convince his reader that Jesus is who he says he is. But in this first half of the book, we have seen time and time again Jesus just do the most incredible things. He's done some pretty cracking miracles, let's be honest. He has shown signs and wonders. He's preached some incredible sermons. He has taught using parables, and he's hooking in all of these listeners, and all these people are gathering around him, including his 12 disciples. But many of them don't get it, or they don't get him. They see, do you remember the time when we looked at Jesus? He comes walking to them on the water. In fact, no, the one where he calms the storm, boat story, the first boat story. And he speaks to the wind and the waves. And they were terrified that they were going to drown. But then they're even more terrified, the scriptures say, when they realize that this man has just spoken to the weather and it's gone calm. And they say, who is this guy? Even the wind and the waves obey him. They didn't quite know just yet who he was. The religious leaders were completely blind to who he was. And yet we see these little snippets, these little stories of individuals that began to get who he was. So last week, if you're with us, the Syro-Phoenician, the Gentile pagan, she was the one that went to Jesus and said, can you heal my daughter? And they have this little conversation together, and she gets it. She completes his riddle for him. She understands who he is. And he's like, for your faith, go. What you're asking for has happened. Same as the faith of the centurion. He just says, you don't even need to come. Just say the word. I know that it will be done. And Jesus is absolutely remarked by these individuals who are getting it. But his own flesh and blood, his own Jewish nation, his own followers, they haven't quite, the penny hasn't yet dropped. But as we look through this chapter today, you'll begin to see that their eyes are beginning to open. So there's 6 parts to the chapter. We're going to skim the beginning, which we'll do in a second, and we're going to skim the end if we get time even to get there, and there's quite a bit in the middle. But there's 6 passages. Those of you especially who are taking notes, you'll see them. 6 stories. There's Jesus feeds the 4,000. Yes, he did it again. The yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. Jesus heals a blind man at Bethsaida. Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. That's when the eyes begin to open. Jesus predicts his death for the first time. That's when Peter puts his foot in it, literally next passage. Quite a common theme for Peter and for many of us, to be fair. And then the last one is the way of the cross. And so, just to skim over, literally, Jesus, very, very much like the feeding of the 5,000, used bread, uses fish. He's out teaching, he's in the wilderness, massive crowd gathered. Mark, he obviously documents it as 4,000 people, but it is a separate miracle. It is a second time. We often remember the feeding of the 5,000, but it did sort of happen again, but to a group that was numbered there of 4,000 people. And then we find into the second passage then, this interesting story when Jesus is on the way. You're going to hear that word a number of times this morning because it's a picture and a journey of what Jesus is taking his disciples along the way to eventually will become Jerusalem. More on that later. But they're on the way and they're having this conversation. They've left the place where they've fed the 4,000. They're going to another place. And Jesus says this. He says, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. And the disciples, they're like, oh gosh, we're in trouble. We've only brought one loaf of bread with us. He's going to be annoyed. We've only got a loaf of bread. That's not enough to feed us. What are we going to do? Jesus turns to them and says, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? He's frustrated. They're missing it. They're missing him. They still don't get it. They still don't get him. And he concludes at the end of that passage, verse 21, he asks the question to them. He says, do you still not understand? And he leaves that with them. And Mark leaves that with us, the reader. He concludes it saying, do you still not get it? Do you still not understand? Now, thankfully, Matthew gives us a bit more meat on the bones. So we turn to Matthew, write this in if you want to have a look at it later. Matthew 16, verses 11 and 12. Same story, same journey, same conversation, but Matthew gives us a bit more. He says, how is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but he was against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Having enough bread wasn't the issue. That wasn't it at all. And it's like when Jesus says, don't you remember? What he's saying is, do you not remember? I just fed 4,000 people. And just a couple of weeks before that, I fed 5,000 people. Bread's not the issue. Jesus can do quite a lot out of small amounts. Having bread, that wasn't it. But the disciples, they got it wrong again. They just misunderstood what Jesus was talking about when he was talking about the yeast. And Jesus goes on and explains, says that the yeast of the Pharisees. The yeast, we understand yeast if you're bakers or anything like that. Any bakers? 1, 2, 3. Only 3 bakers. Gosh, I thought there'd be more. What's that? They're being modest, okay. They know that if I highlight them, I'm going to embarrass them. Probably. Or ask them to make me some bread. Yeah, that's probably the truer one. Yeast, I'm not a baker, but I understand that most of us do. It's that small little stuff, you only need a little bit, it goes in, and it makes the bread nice and big. Is that right? That's pretty much it. The yeast of the Pharisees, their teaching, their misleading, misguided teaching to the people. Jesus saying, watch out, look out for that. Small, but it gets in and it impacts the larger amount. That's really what Jesus was talking about. But again, he's frustrated. He's using parable, he's using riddle, he's using metaphor, and they don't understand it. They're missing it and they're missing him. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear. But as we transition to the third bit of the chapter, here becomes a little bit of a turning point for the disciples. This second half of the gospel begins as we see this incredible healing story, one of many. And Mark deliberately puts this healing story in this place. He inserts it in this part of the chapter. And we'll see into the next bit why that he does it. So they come to a place called Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man, begged Jesus to touch him. And he takes the blind man by hand and leads him outside of the village. Bethsaida is the home of Philip and Andrew and Peter. It's a familiar place. It's on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. And this blind man is brought to him. We don't know his name, and he's brought to him by some people. We don't know if they're his friends, but we just thought, Jesus in town. Here's a blind guy. Let's bring him towards him. Let's see what can happen. We've heard some amazing stories. Very, very similar to last week, if you were here. Mark chapter 7, the man who is deaf and mute. Really, really similar. Do you see what Mark's doing? Do you see why he's put it in that chapter? It's leading towards where we are going. It will make sense soon, I promise you. Verse 23, Jesus takes him away. He takes him away from the crowd. And Mark's recurring theme here is Jesus taking people away. It was in front of a large group of people, a crowd, a gathering of sorts. And this man has been brought to Jesus, and he deliberately takes him away. And we see this time and time again through Mark. Jesus taking people away into houses, away from crowds, away from doubt, away from distraction, and receiving revelation about him or healing from him. Folks, we're gearing up, aren't we? It's coming. He's coming. If there's any little ones in the room. Christmas coming. It's the mad season. We do it every year. I'm not even going to go down the decorations route. We talked about that last week. It's a busy time. And so often we get to just get caught up in it all. And Jesus' invitation in this season as we approach it again is come away with me. Whenever Jesus sends out the disciples in their twos and come back, they're exhausted, they're enthralled and they're thrilled, and there's so much good about Christmas. But Jesus invites the 12. He says, come away with me. Let's go to a solitary place. Let's get some rest. Jesus' invitation this morning again to us is, come away with me. Perhaps some of us, we just got stuff going on in our lives, distractions, obsessions, problems, worries, all number of different things. And Jesus' invitation again is, come away with me. Come away with me. I am the way. And so we have this healing story. This man has been taken away. He's been taken to the side. And it gets a bit weird, let's be honest. Mark doesn't hold back. Jesus spits on his eyes. Let's just read that again, shall we? Jesus spits in the man's eyes and lays hands on this man. Do you remember the technique last week with a guy who couldn't speak and couldn't hear? Jesus stuck his fingers in his ears and he spat and touched his tongue. He used spit, spittle, phlegm. I could use a few other words that'd be wrong too. It's Jesus' methodology. Well, context is everything. And I believe from reading, Jesus ministers at a mishmash time of kind of this incredible culture at the time of Greek, Hellenistic, Roman culture, and then, of course, his own Jewish culture. In the ancient world, healing practice was a full-on contact sport. It's happening all the time. There's all weird and wonderful ways and practices, including substances and potions and concoctions and all kinds of things, including the use of spit was used to bring about healing. So, cultural context. So, in a Greek context, what he had done was not unusual. But in a Jewish context, spit was regarded as unclean. Any kind of bodily excretion coming out of the body was deemed by the Jewish culture was seen as something that was unholy, was something that would contaminate. And here we see Jesus using that to bring about healing. Do you see what's happening? Do you understand what's happening here? The Jewish people would refer to spit as unclean. And yet he uses that which is deemed to contaminate to be made holy and bring about healing. And he comes against the cultural norm of what the Jewish leaders had added to the commandments. If you remember last week, he takes that which is unclean and makes it holy and uses it to bring about healing. But folks, when we pray for healing, please don't be spitting on anyone. Let's not get any funny ideas. Verses 23, 24, Jesus then asks the man, he says, do you see anything? The man says, I see people, but they look like trees walking around. It's still blurred. It hasn't quite, not fully right yet. And this is one and the only time we read in scriptures of all the miracles that Jesus performed where it was known as a progressive miracle. It took more than one go. And so Jesus lays hands on him a second time, and we read that he was healed. His eyes was restored. And so after the first time, there was partial healing. After the second time, complete healing. We've got two things going on. And the first one is this, that Mark is just honest. He's honest about it. He doesn't kind of go, oh, Jesus was having a bad day that day. He had to have two tries at it. He tells the truth. It's in there. It's in the book. And it took 2 times in order to bring full restoration and healing. And that actually gives us courage and it gives us hope when it comes to prayer. We will pray for healing. Physical healing, emotional, spiritual, mental wellness. We're so about wellness. Why? Because Jesus has come to set us free, to make us whole, to make us healed. And so we'll pray for healing. But very often when we pray for healing, it doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen the first time. And sometimes we pray many, many times. And actually sometimes over time people are healed. And that gives us hope and it gives courage that actually Jesus didn't always happen on the first time for him. So if you pray for, nothing happens, well, don't give up. Just don't say, happened once, didn't happen. Give another go, give another go, give another go. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. It's about coming, presenting ourselves, having courage, putting ourselves in the hands of the healer and allowing him to do what he can do. But then secondly, I think there's more that meets the eye. Pun intended. I can see who's with me still, and I can see who's drifting off. I'll go again. There's more that meets the eye of what's actually going on here within the story. And we're going to explore a little bit about what that looks like. So what else is going on? Let's go back to Mark 1:1. Mark is trying to convince us, the readers, of who Jesus really is, that we would see who he really is. And in these verses, in verses 22 to 26, again, if you're taking notes, take it down there. In Greek, when this gospel was written, because it was written in Greek, a different language completely to ourselves, 8 times in those verses, the words for eyes and sight were referred to. And Mark is wanting us to see, ourselves to see, what he's saying through this literal blind man that cannot see. And he's referring back to the previous story when the disciples don't see, they don't understand what he's actually talking about. And this is where Jesus is wanting the disciples to get to, that they would really see Jesus for who he really is. And so in our passage, he asks the man, do you see anything? And the man says, well, no, I just see trees. And Mark, in this passage, in a genius way, is placing these two narratives together in the journey that the disciples are on. The disciples are blind, but soon, as we'll see, they begin to see partially. Not in full view, but partially. They become partially sighted because they begin to start seeing who Jesus really is. And to be honest, We have hindsight. We know the full story. We know what happens in the end. In our life group on Wednesday night, I hope it's okay, Andrew. Andrew asked a question. He says, was it just that the disciples were just dumb? They just didn't get it. And I was like, you're absolutely right. When we read the story, we're like, you idiots. How did you not see? How did you not understand? How did you not? But we know the rest of the story. And at this point on their journey, their trajectory, they didn't know that the cross was going to happen yet. And again, we're going to end and land with that this morning. They didn't understand because they hadn't yet seen. And so in this narrative of the literal partial healing, full healing, we see this two-part thing going on in the physical sense of what's spiritually happening in the lives of the disciples. And so partial sightedness comes in this next story that we transition to, which is Peter's confession of who Jesus really is. And this takes place 2.5 years into being with Jesus. 2.5 years later of being with him, traveling with him, eating with him, sharing sleeping arrangements together, all the miracles, all of the sermons and everything. Peter begins to see who Jesus really, really is. And up until that point, no human had declared with their words and seen who Jesus, the Messiah, the Anointed One, really was. Except for Mark, the narrator, in the story, because he said it right from the get-go. Secondly, the Father, Jesus' Father, had declared who Jesus was at his baptism. And we'll see next week in chapter 9, the transfiguration. Also, the demons, they had also spotted and they had declared who Jesus was as well. But at this point, no human has declared who Jesus is. And so here we are, this next story. They're leaving the place of Bethsaida. You can see, hopefully on the map there, the Sea of Galilee. So the northern point there. And Jesus takes them again on another trip. They go north 25 miles to this place called Caesarea Philippi. And along the way, on the journey, Jesus asks the disciples this question. He says to all of them, he says, who do the people say that I am? And they're going to this crazy place. That place, Caesarea Philippi, is a pagan Gentile place. They have left their own people and they've gone to this mad temple that, which Herod had created in honor of worship to Caesar. And in around this place, they devoted their worship to the nature god Pan. There were temple prostitutes. It was just yuck and dark and horrible. And yet, it was in this place that Peter discovers who Jesus really is. And the point is this simply, is that sometimes it's in the dark places that we see the light. It's in the dark night of the soul. It's in the hitting rock bottom. It's in all the darkness that sometimes we find ourselves in. And it's in those places that the light burns brightly. And they're in this dark place. And it's in that place where Peter declares, which we'll see in a moment, who he is. But before we do, just pause. Along the way, in Mark's chapters 8 to 12, starting obviously today and over the next 3 weeks, 9 times we read that Jesus is taking his disciples on the way. They're going somewhere. They're heading in some sort of direction. And Jesus' call to us today is to follow him in the way, wherever he leads, that we would go. And it's along the way that they have these conversations. And it's along the way that he invites me. He says, who do the people say I am? And for us, in our journeys, in our walks, in our moving along the way, there's that question that's being asked. It's like, who do you say I am? I remember becoming a Christian as a young fella at 16. And again, this is a question, and we talked about this in group the other night. I said I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. But I knew he was the way. And I knew he was who he said he was. And that was enough. That was enough. I had no idea how incredible it was going to be. I had no idea how painful it was going to be. Because the way is the way of suffering. The way is to the cross. The way is the Calvary. And the way, if we're going to be his disciples and follow his way and get in behind him and follow him, it's a path of surrender. It's a path of letting go. And in our humanness, I can see it in some of your faces, we don't want to do that. We want to be master and commander of our own destiny. We want to be in control. We want to make our own decisions and carve our own path. Ask you the question, how's that going for you? I would rather die to myself and follow his lead, because he who dies to self, what does the scripture say? Comes alive in him. But it's topsy-turvy, isn't it? It insults our intelligence and it insults the narrative of our world. In order to find life, we have to give up our lives and follow him and follow in behind him. Jesus is the way, and he's taken them on the way, and he takes them to this dark, horrible place. And he says, who do people say I am? John the Baptist reincarnated. There was one thing that was being said about who Jesus was, and they're like, what? We just chopped his head off. He hasn't come back, surely. Some people say, you're the prophet Elijah. In those days, they were fascinated by Elijah. The rabbis taught that the prophet Elijah had been taken up into heaven in 2 Kings 2, if you're making notes, and would return someday powerfully amongst his people again. And then some said, he's another prophet. He's a good guy. He's doing some good stuff. He's got some cool things to say. But all those suggestions are wrong. And even to this day, people's interpretation of who Jesus really is wrong. Some might think he's a moral teacher. Some people have lots of respect for this guy. It's undeniable that he lived and he existed, right? It's not one of those things. It's like Julius Caesar. It's like Alexander the Great. It was a historic figure. So it's not going to, he existed. But actually who he was, that's the question we're really talking about. Many struggle with a belief that he did the things that he did. The Immaculate Conception or whatever it might be that he raised from the dead. But even for some people who go to church, their whole life still miss who he really is. I was having a text message conversation with someone recently, not part of our church, not part of our community. It was in connection to something else. And I'd had some conversations with this man previously, like verbally on the phone. I'd met him face to face. We'd shared numbers. We were texting each other. And I just assumed from our conversations that he was a Christian. I just thought he was from the things that he said. And part of the conversation ensued, and I wanted to clarify that. And this, it's okay to quote this because I don't think he's definitely not here, and I don't think he's going to hear this, so I think it's okay. This is what he wrote, though. He said this. He said, Paul, I am a churchgoer and always have been, but I haven't taken that big step to ask him into my life as my wife has. I certainly believe in God, if I can say that. I was like, gosh, how many of our churches are filled with these kind of people? They've gone their whole life to church and never really believed. And no offense, I wouldn't sit through boring sermons all my life. I would be running. I'd be up the mountain. I'd be in my bed, if I'm really honest. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the real reason. If you're not a believer yet, please don't stop coming from what I've just said. It's absolutely brilliant. The coffee's good at least, and the crack's good after. Who do you say I am? Peter steps up. You're the Messiah. You are the anointed one. And here's the trick, and we need to remind ourselves this. The Messiah who they were looking for was not who Jesus was. They wanted a military figure who was going to kick out the Romans and restore the glory days of the Jewish nation. That's who they thought the anointed one was to be. And these guys, they've been on this journey and they've seen all the stuff and they've heard all the stuff. And the pen is dropping. the transition moment mark the middle, halftime oranges. They're beginning, the partial sightedness is coming, and they're beginning to see, yes, you're the Messiah, you are the chosen one. But who he was, they get wrong majorly. And we find out about that in the next chapter, in the next bit. He begins to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed after 3 days he will rise again. This is the first of 3 times that Jesus tells the disciples what's going to happen to him. And the first time they are met with shock. They're like, no way. The next few verses, he spoke plainly about this. He's no longer teaching in parable. There's no riddles about this. It's straight between the eyes. These are my words. This is what's going to happen, guys. You need to pay attention. Peter, who's just had a blinder, an absolute blinder, wrong word in this context, has just revealed something. He's done something really well, Peter. Go, Peter. Then puts his foot in it. And Peter takes Jesus aside, this is cracker, and begins to rebuke him. The word rebuke here is the same word that's used when Jesus cast out demons. And so in effect, what's happening here is Peter's saying to Jesus, what you've just said is evil. It's wrong. That is not going to happen to you. There's absolutely no way. What you've just told us, that is not happening. And this was not like a quiet word in Jesus' ear. He was blunt, he was to the point, and it was straight. And you can imagine how Jesus reacts, the well-known verses. He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. He actually calls Peter Satan. And he's saying, if you're going to use this word rebuke, you're the one who's coming at it from this evil position because you don't know. You don't understand what's to come, and you're in the way. You are in the way of my purposes and my Father's purposes, and you don't yet understand what I'm actually going to have to go through in order for Messiah to come, to not just overthrow the Roman occupation, but to overthrow a far greater enemy, Satan himself. He has to go to the cross because it's the only way of victory. Victory doesn't come through the sword and killing people. It comes through sacrifice and surrender and through giving up his own perfect life, and he becomes the perfect sacrifice, which many of us know about. He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. In other words, he's basically saying, fall in line. Remember, they're on the way. They're on the way. They're talking, they're walking, they're talking. They're on these dusty tracks. The disciples are in tow. And possibly Peter was in front. Possibly he was literally physically beside. Or maybe it's just metaphor. Either way, it's definitely metaphor. Jesus says to Peter, get behind me. Get in line. We're on the way. And this is the way we're going to Golgotha. And if you want to be my disciple, get behind me. Follow in, because this is the way of where we are going. And so our question this morning is, are you on the way or in the way? And what's in the way? What do we need to put behind us? What do we need to put to death? What do we need to give up? What do we need to surrender? What do we need to let go of? What attitude? What hurt? What habit? What desire? What is it we just need to put behind us? And listen to it. The word rebuke is really strong that's used here. But it's also really gracious because Jesus is really gracious. Because he invites again into relationship. He says, come, follow me. Come and be with me. Very briefly, last thing then, and it is the last passage. And it's really what Jesus then says, not just to his disciples, but to the crowds again, to the larger group of people. And he says those well-known verses, if you want to be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. And the way to life is through surrender. And the way to freedom is through surrender. And the way, the truth, the life, the bread, Jesus is the bread. He's all these things. He's all these things that that we're longing for. And we spend so much of our lives just kind of wandering around doing our thing. And Jesus' invitation again and again and again is, give me eyes to see and ears to hear where he's at work in your life and in your life. Tomorrow we're going to get up. Loads of us are going to go to work. We're going to go to school. We're going to go to tech. We're going to go wherever we're going to go. If you're a believer, the Holy Spirit is in you. Give us eyes to see what's going on in our lives, in the people that we love. What's happening? He's beckoning. He's wooing. He's inviting. Oh gosh, he's so gracious and he's so kind. And he's at work in our lives. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Carrickfergus Vineyard podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our church, please visit our website at carrickfergusvineyard.org.